Welcome to CBS Saturday Morning. I'm Adriana Diaz.
And I'm Kelly O'Grady. We come on the air this morning with breaking news. Overnight, the United States and Israel began striking targets inside Iran. The attacks began in daylight, just after 10 a.m. local time. Explosions rocked Iran's capital, Tehran, and large plumes of smoke were seen near the offices of Iran's supreme leader.
In an address posted to Truth Social, President Trump confirmed U.S. involvement, saying major combat operations are underway, and the objective is to defend Americans by eliminating, quote, imminent threats from the Iranian regime. The United States has built up a massive military presence in the Middle East over the past few weeks as the president has pressured Iran to abandon its nuclear program.
This morning, Iran state television says it has launched a counterattack on U.S. bases across the Middle East. Israel is on heightened alert, with cities canceling school and closing workplaces this morning. Let's begin our coverage with CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata, who is in Tel Aviv. Charlie, good morning.
Good morning to you, Kelly. At roughly 8:20 this morning here, as you said, around 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock in Tehran, air raid sirens rang out, alerts across Israel on our phones. And that was not incoming missiles, but a warning to Israeli citizens that a war was underway. Stay close. Take to shelters, stay off the streets. As you said, schools were closed. It was described as a joint military operation between the United States and Israeli forces, a preemptive strike. Explosions were then reported in Tehran and in 4 other cities across Iran. Israeli officials confirmed that dozens of strikes were launched targeting like Iranian government buildings, regime targets, Iran's ballistic missile arsenal, and launch sites. Now, within maybe 30 minutes or so, the air raid sirens rang out again here. That was the counterattack that was already underway. Residents were instructed to take shelter. We then started learning and confirming that Iran had begun targeting U.S. military installations across the region. The headquarters of the 5th Fleet in Bahrain, the Navy's 5th Fleet in Bahrain, the largest U.S. airfield in the region, in the Middle East, Al Udeid in Qatar. The Qataris saying that they intercepted a couple of incoming missiles there. Explosions then heard in the northern Iraq at air bases there. And then alarms sounded in Kuwait and other parts of the UAE. Now, after this massive U.S. military buildup that we've been reporting for days and weeks, in rounds of diplomacy with Iran, keeping everybody guessing as to what was about to unfold here, there was no ambiguity or disambiguity in President Trump's message today. This is about regime change. He's telling Iran's military to lay down their weapons, don't try to fight back or face certain death, spelling out a litany of attacks against U.S. forces in this region, going back to the attacks on the Marine barracks in Lebanon, attacks throughout the Iraq war, Iranian-backed attacks on U.S. military, telling Iranian residents to take shelter, get low until the bombing's over, and then overthrow the government. That's what we're looking at this morning, Kelly.
Charlie, a lot of us remember the U.S. and Israeli attack on Iran back in June. How does this attack now compare to that in terms of scale, and what could happen next?
Yeah, Kelly, I mean, this is next level. It's on an entirely different scale. You know, we reported that. That was the Iranian attack against that against that base in Al Udeid. That was pre-warned. U.S. forces knew that was about to happen, and it was a big attack. I mean, they had launched the largest Patriot missile defenses against those incoming missiles, and again, they knew it was coming. What we're seeing here, when I talked about that attack at the 5th Fleet in Bahrain, at Al Udeid, at U.S. forces in northern Iraq, this is on a scale and a level with no warning, going after essentially everything that they can go after. And I also have to mention, the United States and Israel isn't just going after targets inside Iran. We're also learning that they're going after Iranian-backed militias inside Iraq. So this has spread. You talk about Kuwait, the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, the attempted attacks in Bahrain, Al Udeid, and the amount of missiles that are being fired. And here, we've had to take shelter maybe 5 or 6 times, I think, this morning. So this is on the next scale, nothing like what we saw last June.
Charlie D'Agata in Tel Aviv, we are so grateful to have you on the ground bringing us this information. We're going to check back in with you soon. All right, well, this morning we've already heard from President Trump that the U.S. has begun major combat operations in Iran. The president said the strikes were aimed at destroying Iranian missiles and taking out Iran's Navy. We go now to CBS News White House correspondent Willie James Inman, who's in Florida traveling with the president. Good morning.
Hey there, Kelly. Good morning to you. The president posting overnight that video message on Truth Social announcing the U.S. military operation in Iran. And he also mentioned that American lives could be at stake here because as a result of the operation that the Pentagon is calling Operation Epic Fury.
A short time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran. Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime. And I do not make this statement lightly. The Iranian regime seeks to kill. The lives of courageous American heroes may be lost, and we may have casualties. That often happens in war. But we're doing this not for now. We're doing this for the future. Finally, to the great, proud people of Iran, I say tonight that the hour of your freedom is at hand. Stay sheltered. Don't leave your home. It's very dangerous outside. Bombs will be dropping everywhere. When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take. This will be probably your only chance for generations.
The president alluding to possible regime change there in the final part of that video message he posted, talking directly to the Iranian people. Now, we know, of course, that the U.S. and Iran have been involved in those indirect talks and negotiations about Iran's nuclear program. Just this past week, Steve Witkoff, the special envoy for President Trump, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, were in Geneva, Switzerland. You see the picture there, talking about ways to curb Iran's nuclear program. Now, the Omanis were handling and mediating these conversations. The Omani foreign minister had essentially talked about an optimistic way that the U.S. and Iran could somehow come to an agreement in an interview with our own Margaret Brennan just yesterday. It's unclear what happens to those talks now amid this strike that we have seen play out in the past couple of hours. And we are, of course, waiting to hear from President Trump. He could, of course, make a public statement. But in the past couple of days, he has expressed frustration, essentially saying that he's not happy with the progress of those negotiations and conversations thus far. And we are seeing some congressional reaction following these strikes by the U.S. and Israel. A close ally to the president, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, posting this. He said, "The end of the largest state sponsor of terrorism is upon us. God bless President Trump, our military, and our allies in Israel." We're getting some Democratic response as well from Arizona Democratic Senator Ruben Gallego, who's an Iraq war veteran. I'll point out, he says young working class kids should not pay the ultimate price for regime change and a war that hasn't been explained or justified to the American people. We can support the democracy movement and the Iranian people without sending troops to die. Now, we are learning that Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who is also the National Security Advisor, has notified at least some of the so-called Gang of Eight, those top members of Congress who are notified oftentimes in these national security situations. We are also learning via our reporting from our own Nancy Cordes, via a person familiar, that some of these members were surprised by the scale and scope of this operation, saying we didn't have a hint that the strikes would be so expansive or the goals would be so broad, alluding to the possibility of regime change and the scope and scale of this operation that we have seen thus far. Now, we have reached out to the White House for comment. We have not heard back at this moment. And as I mentioned, the president could make another statement, another public statement at any moment today. But at least for now, there are no public events on his schedule. Adriana.
Willie James Inman, thank you so much. For more, let's go to CBS News national security contributor Samantha Vinograd in our Washington newsroom. Sam, good morning. So our viewers are waking up, seeing this enormous news and wondering why now.
Well, Adriana, the Iranian regime has terrorized not just its own people, but Americans for almost 50 years with its support for surrogate networks or proxies, its development of its nuclear program, its ballistic missile program, and more. Why now? According to the administration, the Iranian regime has retained its focus on developing its missile program, its support for proxies, and importantly, its nuclear program. As you may recall, the Obama administration did negotiate a deal to curb the development of Iran's nuclear program, to limit its enrichment capabilities of the material needed for a bomb. President Trump was not satisfied with that agreement. He tore it up and has been quite frustrated about how the Iranians have reportedly engaged in the diplomatic negotiating process, along with their ongoing development of ballistic missiles and support for proxies that have targeted Americans.
Well, and so, you know, I mean, we're talking about the possibility of sort of a long-term type of thing here. I do have to question, I was surprised, Sam, when I heard the president use the word warning of casualties, use the word war. What could this mean for Americans on the home front? Because we see something happening so far away, but what is the possibility for any kind of threat here at home?
Well, Kelly, let's start with what we can see. What we can see is that the United States and Israel are engaged in a decapitation operation against really a hit list of targets inside of Iran, military intelligence and other figures. What we can see as well is that they have a military buildup that will allow them to continue those military strikes for some time. We can also see that Iran is retaliating with missiles. Iran has the ability to strike not just in the region, but also into Europe. So Americans are currently in the range of Iranian missiles. It is also worth noting, however, Iran retains significant cyber capabilities that could implement attacks all over the world and has continuously invested in surrogate networks here in the homeland and all around the world that have historically been quite successful, unfortunately, in targeting Americans. We could also see, and it's too soon to tell, a spike in commodities prices, namely oil, if key maritime corridors like the Strait of Hormuz are impacted by what is likely going to be a prolonged conflict in the region.
Sam, the president made very clear that what he wants to see is the Iranian people rise up and create regime change. What will it take for that to happen? And why do you think the president is putting the onus on the Iranian people versus in Venezuela when the U.S. went in on the ground?
Well, what we don't know is if the United States is engaged in any kind of covert action operations to try to convince members of the regime to switch sides. So we have this public overt messaging to the Iranian people, and ostensibly there could be accompanying covert action operations, influence operations, and otherwise to try to convince members of the regime to switch sides. The president did also directly message members of the regime and say if they lay down arms now, they will be granted amnesty. The leadership structure in Iran is such that we obviously have the supreme leader who has been in hiding and underground for some time. We have the president, and then we have key security officials like the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the head of the Ministry of Intelligence, and others who are critical to responding to these strikes by the United States and Israel and maintaining the actual stability of the regime. So it will certainly take a lot of pressure on the regime through military strikes. There's been sanctions for some time, as well as more than likely other lines of effort and covert action to try to convince key regime figures to lay their arms down, so to speak, and to leave the regime.
Sam, appreciate your time and expertise this morning.